Did you know that by 2019, the United States government had spent 6.4 trillion US dollars in sponsoring wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Pakistan? By 2019, this amount was 2.2 trillion more than what the US government used in its fiscal budget in that year. And did you know that the UK government spent 13 times more money bombing Libya than rebuilding it? For a long time, this expenditure has been kept a secret. But suddenly and luckily, they were revealed to the House of Commons in UK and the representative houses in the United States. Now, according to a statement from Amanda Messiers, which was published on November 20th, 2019, and this was referring to revelations by the Pentagon and research conducted by the Watson Institute of International and Public Affairs at Brown University. The United States government had spent around 6.4 trillion US dollars since it began its war in 2001. This money was spent in Iraq, Syria, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And at the same time, the same government spent around 4.4 trillion US dollars during its 2019 fiscal year. Now we see that the United States government spent around 2 trillion more on wars than on supporting Americans. This revelation also stated that during this war, a research conducted by the Watson Institute of International and Public Affairs at Brown University found that during these wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Pakistan, around, or let me say more than 801,000 people died directly as a result of these wars, and more than 335,000 were civilians. Of these people who died, 335,000 of them were civilians, and another 21 million people have been displaced from their homes. I talked about the United States expenditure on wars, and I also compared the United States expenditure on its citizens. We found that during the natural disasters that hit the United States in Hawaii and southeast Louisiana, the United States federal government gave the survivors a maximum of $700 to help them in recovery. The same government gave Ukraine more than 100 billion to sponsor its war with Russia. Now, at the same time, and a similar case is seen in this context, the United States government spent more money in wars, spent more money sponsoring wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Pakistan than it spent on its citizens. Like I have just said, the government since 2001 has spent 6.4 trillion US dollars. The same government in 2019 spent only 4.4 trillion US dollars on its fiscal budget, the federal budget. That is why I emphasized that the United States government should first focus on domestic issues that affect the United States citizens, than focusing on issues that require more money but are not of a priority to the United States. When we go to the United Kingdom, the House of Commons revealed that the United Kingdom spent just 25 million euros on stabilization projects in Libya after the 2011 NATO intervention. Now, at the same time, the House of Commons library files state that the total cost of the 7-month long 2011 military campaign in Libya cost the government around 320 million euros. The UK government spent 320 million euros in bombing Libya in 2011 for 7 months. After the bombing ended, the same UK government spent only 25 million euros that was sent to Libyan authorities for stabilization projects, while some 15 million was separately spent on humanitarian aid. Now, we see a government that spends more on wars, that spends more on destruction, that spends more on deaths on foreign soils than it spends on stabilization projects, recovery projects. We know and we understand, and we can arguably say that NATO members, including the United Kingdom and the US, were in the front line in the destruction of Libya. They were in the front line in bringing instability in Libya. They were in the front line in destabilizing, let me say so, Libya. And they must be blamed for the current problems facing Libya today. You can see that the UK government spent 320 million euros in bombing Libya. That was in 2011. The same government spent only 25 million euros in rebuilding Libya. The government is very fast, very quick to spend more money, to release more money, to bomb a country, a sovereign country. The same government is very reluctant to send money to help the innocent civilians in Libya recover. That is what we are talking about, and that is my main problems with the UK government and the United States, and majorly with NATO. I talked about the United States, and I have given you just a summary that the United States spent around 6.4 trillion US dollars in wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, and Syria. The same government spent around 4.4 trillion US dollars in its 2019 budget. Now, how much did the US government spend in bombing Libya? How much did the US government spend in bombing Libya? Now, ABC News published an article on March 29th, 2011 at 13:08 hours, and this publication was referring to a statement released by the Pentagon. According to this publication, the US government spent at least 600 million US dollars during their first week of intervention in Libya. The US government spent at least 600 million for their first week of intervention in Libya. That was a statement released by the Pentagon. If the government spent 600 million, let us just work with 600 million per week in their intervention in Libya, and this intervention went for 7 months. Let us just calculate, just a simple math, just some simple math. A month has 4 weeks, and each week it was 600 million. Then we multiply by 4, and we find that the United States government was spending around 2.4 billion US dollars every month in bombing Libya. If it was 2.4, then we multiply by 7. We find that the United States government spent around 16.8 billion US dollars in bombing Libya alone in 2011 during their 7-month intervention in Libya. The same statement from the Pentagon went ahead and said some very specifics about the expenditure on different ammunitions, missiles, and the rest during the United States government intervention in Libya. You can see from just what I have said, the United States government and the UK government are very ready to spend more on destroying a country, and the same governments are very reluctant to spend more in rebuilding the same countries that they have destroyed. Libya gives a very practical example of what the United States and the UK are capable of doing. Libya is a practical example of what NATO is capable of doing. If the UK government spent 325 million euros in bombing Libya, and the United States spent at least 16.8 billion US dollars in bombing Libya, the same countries, with the UK spending only 25 million euros in rebuilding Libya, and the United States obviously spending less than what it spent in bombing Libya to rebuild the country. How do we rate the actions of NATO? How do we rate the actions of the United States? And how do we rate the actions of the United Kingdom? I want to emphasize what I said yesterday. The priority in these countries, the priority in the United States, the priority in the United Kingdom should be rebuilding their country, building their countries, focusing on the interests of their people. Many civilians are suffering in the United States. Many civilians are suffering in the United Kingdom. And it is the responsibility of their governments to ensure that these civilians meet their needs. The responsibility of the governments to ensure that there are good services, good infrastructure, good hospitals, good healthcare, good education, and the rest. Rather than spending more money, billions, in destroying countries, spending billions in sponsoring wars, these billions should be directed to the domestic issues in these countries. I believe the UK government has issues to address internally. The United States government has issues to address internally. Such billions and trillions should be directed to solving such issues in the United States and the United Kingdom. Once again, I want to implore the governments of NATO countries, and specifically I want to implore the government of the United States and the United Kingdom to focus on issues that affect their citizens first. Focus on internal issues that directly affect citizens. The United States should direct these millions and billions to solving issues within the country. The United Kingdom likewise should direct these millions in solving issues that affect citizens directly in the country. Rather than spending trillions and billions in sponsoring foreign wars, rather than spending millions, trillions, and billions in fighting foreign wars, these monies should be directed to, let me say, perfecting services in the countries. The United States government and the UK government have a responsibility for their people. They have a responsibility for their citizens, and they have a responsibility to maintain global peace. I am not saying that it is unnecessary for the United States government to support countries which are unstable. I am not saying that the United States government is not supposed to support Ukraine. I am not saying that the UK government is not supposed to support Ukraine. But what I am trying to say is that this government should first focus on issues that affect their citizens. They should first focus on addressing internal issues, domestic issues that directly affect their citizens. If that is done, then they have the leeway to sponsor the foreign wars in other countries. But before that is done, I will always have a problem with these governments. I will always stand to correct these governments You cannot spend more money in destroying a country and spend less money in rebuilding the same country. You cannot spend more money in killing a democratic leader, and you cannot spend more money in bringing back democracy in the country. The UK government and the United States government have a responsibility to redeem themselves in the atrocities that they committed in Libya. They have a responsibility to redeem what they did in Libya. They have a responsibility to rebuild Libya and ensure that Libya has a functional government. If that is done, then they shall have done justice to Colonel Muammar Gaddafi and the people of Libya, and more importantly, the world.